Hey guys, how we doing? Shh, I don't care. So yeah, how's my day been so far? Got a phone call from Barclays Bank. Yeah, got a phone call from Barclays Bank, specifically their fraud department. What's this, I hear you ask? Why would Barclays be calling you don't seem like a fraudulent spender? Because your boy last night got a bit drunk and decided to order approximately £300 worth of PSPs and PSP games. Hey, I know it's weird, I'm a loser. If you hadn't figured that out by this point, then honestly unsubscribe, because I think it's been fairly obvious. But I have a weird fucking obsession with PSPs. I've got a little collection of them over there. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, I mean PlayStation Portables, the like mid-2000s version of the DS. And yeah, I went onto eBay last night and I spent nearly £300 on 52 PSP games and 3 PSPs. Before you say it, I know I have way too much money for someone who is this fucking stupid. Do I regret my decision? No. So keep your eyes out, because I might try and do a bit of PSP content if you guys are interested. Hey, listen man, I'm being me. This is what I enjoy in life. So, you know, some people like to go on long walks, some people like to go and get laid, some people like to fucking do drugs. I like to play with PSPs. So ladies, form an orderly queue. You will need wet floor signs, guys, because if there's one thing that women love, it's a 24-year-old man who spends essentially an equivalent to a month's rent on PSPs. So yeah, let's get into today's video, shall we? Okay, so without any further ado, you're about to watch a man who knows literally nothing about anything try and talk about something. Okay, so as I'm sure you've all seen by now, Roberto, Zerbi and Brighton have parted ways by mutual consent. So the chief exec, Paul Barber, has said he understands what our limitations are behind the scenes. Our model is very well known to him. We won't break that model for anybody or anyone. Brighton are refusing to say what triggered the announcement, but you only have to read their statement for the biggest clue, which was what I've just read. Yeah, it's still kind of, it's not been publicly stated exactly why Zerbi and Brighton have parted ways, but I think I have a pretty good idea, and that's what we're going to talk about. And let's actually talk about Zerbi's time at Brighton. So he was there for the best part of 2 years, and let's not forget that when Zerbi came in, it was just after Graham Potter had gone to Chelsea, and at the time Graham Potter was considered to be one of the hottest new prospects in world football, which is why Chelsea paid an insane £21 million in compensation fees to Brighton to acquire the Englishman's services. Despite the big shoes to fill, Zerbi has proved himself to be a top-class manager for Brighton. He managed Brighton 89 times, winning 38 games, drawing 20 and losing on 31 occasions. Zerbi managed to get Brighton to 6th place in his first season in charge of the Seagulls, and also got them to the FA Cup semi-finals, so qualifying for Europe and a cup run, basically. Fantastic work from Zerbi. And then after a summer where Brighton were picked apart, obviously you saw Alexi McAllister move to Liverpool, and Moises Caicedo went to Chelsea for over 100 million, which is still boggling to me. They also lost Robert Sanchez, who I think that gets overlooked, but losing your first choice keeper to Chelsea, especially a rival, is going to be tricky. But Brighton did what Brighton do best, which is sign players for very humble transfer fees and get them to perform really, really well. They signed João Pedro from Watford, obviously, and they also signed James Milner on a free transfer, Bart Verbruggen to replace the outgoing Robert Sanchez, all of who have played really well this season. You know, people I think, especially with James Milner, will think, oh well, it's kind of a novelty, you know, he's been in the Premier League for years. He's still doing a good job, man. Like, I know he's not going to start 38 games out of 38, but a very good squad player, a very wise head, an experienced player to have in the dressing room, so really good signing. But I realistically, is Zerbi leaving Brighton to do with what's been going on the pitch? No, because as I've just said, Brighton have had a really good time of it since Zerbi's been the manager. Obviously they finished 11th place this season, which is quite a way off 6th in European spots like last year, but you've also got to remember that they have lost a lot of first team players to direct rivals, and also they haven't played European football before, so this is their first season with European football, which is significantly more games they have to play for that squad to get used to that number of games. It can be tricky, you know, that's why a lot of teams like this season, for example, Brighton have dropped out of Europe, and also the domestic form hasn't been great, and that also may be down to the fact that their players aren't used to playing 40-50 games in a season, and also they don't have the squad depth yet to be able to compete on all fronts. You look at like fucking Man City winning a treble, or Man United winning the treble back in '99. The reason a treble is so hard to win is because you have to play the most games. So to jump from playing basically basically cup games and Premier League games to then also including European football in that, it can be a difficult transition, which might go to explain why Brighton have dropped down the table this season. Yeah, Brighton have managed to stay consistently competitive basically, whilst also continuing to stick to that model of being a feeder club for other bigger Premier League teams. This season as well, De Zerbi has been linked to so many different jobs. Obviously Ten Hag at United and then Pochettino at Chelsea, they've consistently been linked to being sacked by their clubs. De Zerbi has been a man that's constantly been linked with being their replacement. As soon as Jurgen Klopp announced his departure from Liverpool, De Zerbi was one of the first names to be linked to that job. Not that long ago, like last week, Thomas Tuchel confirmed that he will not be staying at Bayern Munich, and De Zerbi was instantly again linked to that job. Yeah, it's no secret that De Zerbi has got plenty of options and has had plenty of options. I think that Brighton's policy with their players is they're not going to drag out a transfer saga, they're not going to haggle for prices, they very much wait till the right offer's placed and then let the player go. And that's why they have been so successful financially, because they never hold on to a player for I think longer than the player wants to. If the player wants to leave, he can leave and Brighton will take whatever money is given to them. Look at Moises Caicedo and Alexis McAllister last year, Robert Sanchez, Marc Cucurella, there's loads of examples. So they probably also have that policy with their managers as well, and they'd probably rather get rid of De Zerbi now than wait until he has like a summer where he buys these players and then decides that he wants to move to, you know, United, Chelsea, wherever, and Brighton are left without a manager and a squad that the new manager coming in won't have had time to work with. Whereas now De Zerbi's left, Brighton can get a new manager who they will probably announce very soon. He has an entire summer to work with the squad, to get rid of players he doesn't want, to bring in players that he does want, to implement his system, his style of football, have a successful season next year. So I think getting rid of De Zerbi at this point is probably the perfect move from Brighton. And also with De Zerbi, you've got to remember, like, his stock has risen so much over the last year being at Brighton, and he probably has had plenty of offers to go to bigger and clubs that invite more pressure. And the Brighton job probably does take a toll on managers, because basically every season they're asked to improve and remain competitive and do well in Europe, do well in the cups, finish in European places in the league, whilst also constantly selling their best players, or most of their best players. The manager is then expected to replace those players with players who probably don't have that experience, aren't at that quality yet, and they're expected to then coach that quality out of those players, so those players then step in to replace the outgoing superstars they sell. However, when those players then reach a certain level of quality, they get sold as well. So it's just this constant cycle of building up players, building up a squad, building up a good team, and then getting it picked apart in summer transfer windows and January transfer windows, and being asked then to replace those players and, like I said, remain as competitive. So like I said, from De Zerbi's point of view, there is a part of him that probably thinks like, well, I could go to Chelsea, United, Liverpool. I know Liverpool have got a replacement manager now, but just for argument's sake, goes to any of these clubs where he gets to keep hold of his best players. He has much more financial freedom as well, because let's be honest, Brighton don't spend massive amounts of money, and he can then compete, you know, for the biggest competitions going. So the move, personally, I think for De Zerbi makes a lot of sense as well. But the one question I have is that we've seen this before. We've seen this when Graham Potter left Brighton and went to Chelsea, and it all went pear-shaped. He had a terrible time of it, and his reputation was left in the bin afterwards, and he hasn't actually worked in management since either, which I think tells a story in itself. The jobs are completely different as well. At Brighton, like I said, you're expected to be a good coach, you're expected to coach quality out of players, you're expected to implement a system which also brings the best out of these players. Whereas when you go to somewhere like Chelsea, it's a completely different ballgame, because you are that freedom, that financial freedom that De Zerbi will be given. It will be interesting to see how he adapts to it, because he's used to working on a shoestring budget at Brighton, and he's used to having to rely on coaching alone to get the best out of those players. And like I said, it will just be interesting to see how he manages egos, how he'll be able to manage, like I said, this season he's had to manage Brighton both in Europe and domestically. Realistically, I know that they got knocked out by Roma in the Europa League, who won the Conference League last year. I kind of expected Brighton to go further than the round of 16, considering they topped their group as well, and I also probably expected Brighton to do better domestically. Like 11th place it's a really good finish for a club like Brighton. However, based on how they were last season, I would have expected them to be closer to maybe 7th, maybe 8th, and like I said, I would have expected a bit more of a journey in Europe. The only season we've seen De Zerbi manage European games and domestic football at Brighton, they haven't done so well. So when he's managing, for example, at Chelsea, who will have European football next year, it'll be interesting to see how he does. Obviously, the Chelsea move, I think, makes the most sense. He'll also be rejoining Moises Caicedo and Robert Sanchez at Chelsea, and for a guy who has had to work on a shoestring budget for the last 2 years, the promise of being able to spend massive amounts of money would be interesting, and I think would be very, very inviting for De Zerbi. And there's no doubt in my mind that De Zerbi is a top coach, and I think if he does go to Chelsea, you'll see players like Cole Palmer still do really well. He'll be able to help Cucurella, be able to Mudryk, all these young guys. I think De Zerbi will do well with, but it's also at Chelsea the difficulty of a lot of signings, in my opinion, and I think that you'll probably agree with this, aren't really made by the manager. They're made by Todd Boehly because he wants to have this like all-star 11. To see how De Zerbi deals with Boehly as well will be interesting. As far as we can see, I think Chelsea makes the most sense for De Zerbi. I don't think United will get rid of Ten Hag. Obviously Liverpool already have a replacement in Arne Slot, and except for those guys, I think Ange Postecoglou will stay at Spurs. I think De Zerbi wants to go to one of the top clubs in the Premier League, and Chelsea kind of the only club I can see who would appoint him, basically. So yeah, and then with Brighton, I honestly trust them enough to know that they will probably get in another coach who is going to be fantastic and fit their club really well, because Brighton have a very, very, very good system when it comes to recruitment, not only with players but also with managers. You know, Graham Potter and De Zerbi are both examples of that. So yeah, Brighton are always an interesting club to keep an eye on. Let me know what you think, guys. Let me know if you think that De Zerbi and Brighton have made the correct decisions. Do you think De Zerbi will do well if he does take the Chelsea job? Do you think Brighton will fare well next season without him? So yeah, just let me know. Anyway, thank you very much for watching as always, guys, and I will see you in the next video.